The Tuesday evening shift at the restaurant started like any other. David had been running this place for over a decade, and he'd seen just about everything. Drunk customers, celebrity sightings, marriage proposals, even a few arguments that got a little too heated. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was about to happen. It was around 7:30 when the front door swung open with more force than usual. David was standing near the host stand going over the reservation list with his team when he noticed the man stumbling inside. The guy looked completely out of it. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he was wearing sunglasses even though the sun had already set outside. At first, David thought maybe the man had too much to drink somewhere else and wandered into the wrong place. It happened sometimes in this part of town. People would bar hop and lose track of where they were supposed to be. David walked toward him with a friendly smile, ready to politely redirect him if needed. But something felt off. The man wasn't walking straight. He kept touching his face like he was trying to remember something important. His mouth was moving, but the words coming out didn't make any sense. Just random sounds and half-finished sentences that trailed off into nothing. "Sir, can I help you find someone?" David asked, keeping his voice calm and professional. He'd learned over the years that a gentle approach worked best in these situations. The man turned toward David's voice, but his eyes behind those sunglasses seemed to look right through him. He mumbled something that sounded like, "Need to, the boy. I promised." Then he stumbled forward, catching himself on the host stand. Several diners nearby had already noticed the commotion. David could see them whispering to each other, some pulling out their phones. This was Los Angeles, after all. Everyone loved recording anything unusual. "Sir, why don't we get you some water and call someone for you?" David tried again, reaching out to steady the man's arm. That's when everything went wrong. The touch seemed to trigger something in the confused man. He jerked away violently, his arm swinging out and knocking over the beautiful ceramic vase that sat on the host stand. The crash was loud enough to make everyone in the dining room stop mid-conversation. Water and flowers scattered across the polished floor. "Don't touch me," the man shouted. But his words were slurred and desperate rather than angry. Have to get to Tommy. Promised him. Promised." David's heart rate picked up. This wasn't just someone who'd had too much to drink. Something was seriously wrong with this person. He could see real fear in the other customers' faces now. A woman grabbed her young daughter and pulled her closer. An elderly couple near the window stood up, ready to leave. The restaurant had excellent reviews and a reputation David had worked hard to build. But more importantly, he had 20 people in this dining room who were now frightened. His staff was looking at him, waiting for him to handle the situation. Okay, David said, holding up his hands. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Let's just step outside and we can talk about Tommy, all right?" But the man wasn't listening anymore. He stumbled deeper into the restaurant, heading toward the main dining area. His shoulder bumped into a table, making wine glasses rattle dangerously. The couple sitting there pushed their chairs back quickly. David's assistant manager, Kelly, appeared at his side. "Should I call the police?" she whispered urgently. "Not yet," David replied, though he was starting to think it might come to that. "Let me try to get him outside first." David moved quickly, intercepting the man before he could crash into another table. "Sir, please." "You need to leave. You're scaring people." "Scaring?" The man's voice cracked. He pulled off his sunglasses, and that's when David's breath caught in his throat. Even in his confused state, even with his eyes unfocused and red, the face was unmistakable. This wasn't just some random person having a breakdown. This was Keanu Reeves, the actual movie star, and he was clearly in serious trouble. But David didn't have time to process the shock of recognition. Because at that exact moment, Keanu lurched forward again, this time knocking into a waiter who was carrying a tray of expensive entrees. The food went flying. Plates crashed to the floor. The sound of breaking dishes mixed with gasps from the diners. The waiter, a young guy named Tom who'd only been working there for 3 months, stumbled backward and nearly fell. Instinct took over. Years of protecting his staff, his restaurant, his customers all kicked in at once. David grabbed Keanu's arms from behind, trying to restrain him without causing injury. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave right now," he said firmly. Keanu struggled against the grip, but his movements were uncoordinated and weak. He kept trying to say something about a promise, about a kid, about being late. None of it made sense. All David knew was that this situation was spiraling out of control and he needed to end it before someone got hurt. "Kelly, get the door," David called out. What happened next would haunt David for days afterward. As he guided then pushed Keanu toward the exit, the actor's legs seemed to give out. David was gripping him firmly, trying to move him along, but Keanu wasn't cooperating. He was fighting, weakly but desperately, like someone in a nightmare who can't wake up. The front door was only 10 feet away. David just needed to get him outside, away from the frightened customers, away from the phones that were definitely recording everything now. He could sort it all out once they were in the fresh air. But Keanu suddenly twisted in his grip and David's hold slipped. To keep control of the situation, David did something he immediately regretted. He shoved harder than he meant to. Much harder. Keanu stumbled through the door that Kelly was holding open. His feet tangled. His arms windmilled uselessly. And then he fell, hard, right onto the concrete sidewalk outside. The sound of his body hitting the ground made David's stomach turn. He rushed outside, his mind racing. What had he just done? The man was clearly sick or hurt or something, and he'd just thrown him out like a piece of trash. Keanu was trying to push himself up, moving slowly like every part of him hurt. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. His sunglasses had skittered away across the sidewalk. David stood there frozen as a crowd began to gather on the street. He could hear the whispers starting, could see the phones pointing at them. Oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves. Did that guy just assault him? "Someone call the police!" David's mouth went dry. His hands were shaking. 12 years of hard work, of building a reputation, of doing everything right, and it was all about to come crashing down, because he'd just physically thrown one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood onto the street. And then, cutting through all the chaos and confusion, came a scream. A woman's voice, desperate and relieved at the same time. Thank God. Someone found him. David turned to see a woman in hospital scrubs pushing through the growing crowd, tears streaming down her face. She dropped to her knees beside Keanu, her hands checking him over with practiced efficiency. Nothing made sense. But David was about to discover that nothing about this night was what it seemed. David couldn't move. His feet felt like they were stuck to the sidewalk as he watched the woman in scrubs kneel beside Keanu. The crowd around them was getting bigger by the second. People walking by stopped to see what was happening. Cars slowed down. Phone cameras were everywhere, pointed at him, at Keanu, at the whole mess he'd just created. "Is he okay?" David finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up at him briefly. Her face was a mix of relief and panic. "He's breathing. That's what matters right now." She turned her attention back to Keanu, gently touching his shoulder. "Keanu, can you hear me? It's Dr. Patterson, Linda Patterson from the hospital." Hospital? David's mind was spinning. What was a doctor doing here? Had she been following them? Nothing was making any sense. Keanu groaned and tried to sit up. His movements were still slow and uncoordinated, like someone fighting through a thick fog. The blood from his lip had smeared across his chin, and there was a scrape on his cheek from where he'd hit the concrete. "Easy, easy," Dr. Patterson said softly, supporting his back. "Don't try to get up too fast." Kelly appeared at David's elbow. She'd followed him outside and her face had gone completely pale. "David, what do we do? Should I call an ambulance?" "I think—" "Yes, call them," David said, though his brain felt like it was moving through mud. He couldn't stop staring at Keanu, at the blood, at the evidence of what he'd done. "Already on it," someone in the crowd called out. "I called 911. "They're on their way." David wanted to say something, to explain himself, to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. How do you apologize for throwing someone onto concrete? For hurting them when they were clearly already in trouble? Dr. Patterson was checking Keanu's pupils with a small flashlight she'd pulled from her pocket. "Keanu, do you know where you are?" "Tommy," Keanu mumbled. His eyes tried to focus on her face but kept drifting. "I have to. Promised Tommy I'd come back. The cards? We were supposed to finish the card game." "Who's Tommy?" someone in the crowd asked. Dr. Patterson ignored them. She kept her attention on Keanu, her professional training clearly taking over. "Keanu, you're not at the hospital anymore. You left. Do you remember leaving?" Keanu's face scrunched up in confusion. "Left? No, I was playing cards with Tommy. Go fish, he was winning." He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. "Have to get back. He's waiting." David watched this exchange, feeling more confused by the second. A card game? A kid named Tommy? What did any of this have to do with why Keanu had stumbled into his restaurant, acting like he was out of his mind? "Ma'am," David said, stepping closer. "What's going on? Why was he in my restaurant like that?" Dr. Patterson looked up at him, and for the first time, David saw something other than panic in her eyes. It was gratitude. Actual gratitude. "You stopped him," she said simply. "Thank God you stopped him." "Stopped him?" David repeated. "I threw him out of my restaurant. I hurt him." "You kept him in one place," Dr. Patterson corrected. "I've been looking for him for the last 40 minutes. He could have wandered anywhere, could have walked into traffic, could have—" She stopped herself, taking a shaky breath. "Someone drugged him." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The crowd around them went quiet. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade for a moment. "Drugged?" Kelly said from beside David, "like, on purpose?" Dr. Patterson nodded, her jaw tight. "He was visiting a patient at Cedars-Sinai, a 10-year-old boy with leukemia. Tommy Rodriguez. The kid's been fighting cancer for 2 years, and his one wish was to meet Keanu Reeves. So Keanu came, spent over an hour with him, playing cards, talking about movies, making the kid smile for the first time in weeks." David's chest tightened. He looked down at Keanu, who was still trying to make sense of where he was, still mumbling about promises and card games. "Someone brought Keanu a coffee during the visit," Dr. Patterson continued. Her hands were shaking now, whether from adrenaline or anger, David couldn't tell. "Said it was from the nurse's station. A thank you for taking time to visit." He drank it. And about 20 minutes later, he started acting strange, confused, disoriented. By the time I found the cup and had it tested, he'd already walked out of the building. "But who would do that?" Kelly asked. "Who would drug him?" "Hospital security is reviewing footage now," Dr. Patterson said. "But I had to find him first. I've been driving around the neighborhood, checking every shop, every restaurant. I was terrified I'd find him collapsed somewhere or worse." The sound of sirens grew louder. 2 police cars and an ambulance turned the corner, their lights painting the street in flashes of red and blue. David's stomach dropped even further. Police. Of course there would be police. He'd assaulted a celebrity on a public sidewalk, and it was probably already all over social media. As the paramedics rushed over with their equipment, David took a step back. He wanted to disappear, to rewind the last hour and handle everything differently. If he'd just known, if he'd just understood what was happening. But he hadn't known. He'd seen someone acting dangerously, and he'd done what he thought was right. One of the police officers, a tall woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, walked over to David. Her expression was neutral, professional. "Sir, I need you to stay right here. We're going to need a statement." "I didn't mean to hurt him," David blurted out. "He was in my restaurant acting erratic, scaring customers. I just wanted to get him outside." "We'll get to all that," the officer said calmly. "Just stay put for now." David watched as the paramedics worked on Keanu, checking his vital signs, asking him questions he couldn't quite answer. Dr. Patterson was talking rapidly to them, explaining about the drugs, about the hospital, about everything that had happened. Kelly touched his arm gently. "David, this isn't your fault. You didn't know." "Doesn't matter," David said quietly. "Look at him." "I did that." The crowd had grown massive now. David could see people on their phones typing frantically. He could imagine the headlines already. "Restaurant manager assaults Keanu Reeves." His life was about to become a nightmare. One of the paramedics helped Keanu onto a stretcher. He was more alert now, his eyes clearer but still obviously not fully aware of what was happening. As they started to lift the stretcher, Keanu's gaze found David in the crowd. For a moment, their eyes met. David expected to see anger or fear or hatred. He deserved all of that and more. But instead, Keanu just looked confused, like he was trying to remember something important but couldn't quite grasp it. "I'm sorry," David called out, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Keanu's mouth opened like he wanted to respond, but then the paramedics were moving, loading him into the ambulance. Dr. Patterson climbed in beside him, never leaving his side. The second police officer, a younger guy with a notebook already out, approached David. "Okay, let's start from the beginning. What exactly happened here tonight?" David took a deep breath and started talking. He explained everything, from the moment Keanu walked in to the moment he ended up on the sidewalk. The officer wrote it all down, his face expressionless. Meanwhile, David's phone started buzzing in his pocket. Then it didn't stop. Text after text, call after call. The videos were probably already going viral. His restaurant was probably already being review bombed by people who'd never even eaten there. Kelly pulled out her own phone, and her face went white. "David, you need to see this." She showed him the screen. Twitter was exploding. The video of David pushing Keanu out of the restaurant had been viewed over 1,000,000 times already. The comments were brutal. "Monster. Sue him for everything he's got. Imagine treating Keanu Reeves like that. Lock him up." David handed the phone back, unable to look anymore. His hands were still shaking. His whole body felt numb. The ambulance pulled away, sirens blaring. The police officers continued taking statements from witnesses. And David stood there, watching his entire world collapse around him, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Dr. Patterson's words kept echoing. "Thank God you stopped him." He just wished he understood what that really meant. David spent the next 2 hours at the police station giving his statement over and over again. Different officers kept asking the same questions in different ways, like they were trying to catch him in a lie. But there was no lie to catch. He told them exactly what happened, every detail, no matter how bad it made him look. The holding room was cold and sterile, with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead and made everything feel surreal. David sat at a metal table, his hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Walk me through it one more time," Detective Morrison said. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes that had probably seen everything twice. "From the moment Mr. Reeves entered your establishment," David rubbed his face. "I already told you everything. 3 times, I know, but I need to make sure I have it right for the report." So David told the story again. The stumbling entrance, the confusion, the knocked-over vase, the frightened customers, the decision to remove him from the restaurant, the push, the fall. Every time he said it out loud, it sounded worse. Detective Morrison wrote notes on a legal pad, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. When David finished, the detective leaned back in his chair and studied him for a long moment. "You know what's interesting?" Morrison said finally. "I've seen the videos, at least a dozen different angles from people's phones. And you know what I see?" David shook his head, afraid to guess. "I see a business owner trying to protect his customers from what looked like a dangerous situation. I see someone who used force, yes, but not excessive force. You didn't punch him. You didn't kick him. You moved him toward the door and he fell. I pushed him hard," David said quietly. "Hard enough that he couldn't catch himself." "Maybe," Morrison agreed. "Or maybe he was so drugged up that he couldn't have caught himself anyway." Dr. Patterson told us the toxicology came back. Someone put a heavy dose of benzodiazepines and some kind of dissociative in his coffee, enough to knock out someone twice his size. The fact that he was walking at all is pretty remarkable. David processed this information. "So what happens now? Am I being charged with something?" Morrison closed his notebook. "That's not up to me. That's up to the district attorney and more importantly up to Mr. Reeves. If he wants to press charges for assault, that's his right." The words hit David like a physical blow. Of course Keanu would press charges. Why wouldn't he? David had thrown him onto concrete in front of dozens of witnesses. "Can I go?" David asked. "For now. But don't leave town. We're still investigating the drugging incident and we may need you to come back in." David nodded and stood up on shaky legs. As he walked out of the police station into the early morning darkness, he pulled out his phone. 147 notifications. He didn't open any of them. Kelly was waiting in the parking lot in her car. She'd insisted on staying, even though David had told her to go home hours ago. That was Kelly, loyal to a fault. "How bad?" she asked as David climbed into the passenger seat. "I don't know yet. They said it depends on whether Keanu wants to press charges." Kelly drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking again. "I called Mr. Hawthorne." David's heart sank. Richard Hawthorne owned the restaurant. He was a good man, fair, but he was also a businessman, and this situation was a PR nightmare. "What did he say?" "He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. David leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. He already knew how that conversation would go. Hawthorne would ask for his resignation to protect the restaurant's reputation. It was the smart business move. The only move, really. 12 years of his life gone in one terrible night. When Kelly dropped him off at his apartment, David went straight to his laptop. He needed to see what people were saying, even though he knew it would hurt. The masochistic part of him needed to know exactly how bad the damage was. Twitter was a wasteland of anger. The hashtag was trending nationwide. But as David scrolled through the hate, something strange started happening. The narrative was beginning to shift. A new video had surfaced, this one from inside the restaurant. It showed the whole incident from start to finish. It showed Keanu knocking over the vase, stumbling into tables, nearly knocking over a waiter carrying food. It showed David trying to help, trying to calm the situation before finally making the decision to remove him. And people were starting to see it differently. Wait, the guy was protecting his customers. What was he supposed to do? If a random person came into my business acting like that, I'd do the same thing. This isn't the manager's fault. He didn't know Keanu was drugged. Then a local news station posted an interview with Dr. Patterson from outside the hospital. David turned up the volume on his laptop and watched. The reporter, a young woman with perfect hair and too much makeup, held a microphone up to the doctor's face. "Can you tell us about Keanu Reeves's condition?" "He's stable and resting," Dr. Patterson said. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up for 24 hours straight. "The drugs are working their way out of his system. He should make a full recovery." "And what about the incident at the restaurant? The manager who assaulted him?" Dr. Patterson's face hardened. "That manager didn't assault anyone. That manager kept Keanu in one place so I could find him. If Keanu had kept wandering in his confused state, he could have walked into traffic. He could have been picked up by whoever drugged him. That manager might have saved his life even if neither of them knew it at the time." The reporter blinked, clearly not expecting that response. But he was forcibly removed from the establishment. He was removed from a situation where he was frightening other people and potentially putting himself in more danger. "I watched the videos. The manager showed remarkable restraint considering the circumstances. He had no way of knowing what was wrong. He just knew something was wrong. And he acted." David felt something crack in his chest. He'd spent the last 6 hours drowning in guilt and fear, and here was this doctor publicly defending him. But would it be enough? His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Is this David Chen?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm Mr. Reeves's attorney." David's blood turned to ice. Here it comes, he thought. The lawsuit, the criminal charges, the end of everything. "Okay," he managed to say. "Mr. Reeves would like to meet with you. Tomorrow afternoon, if possible." "At the hospital. Meet with me?" David repeated stupidly. "Yes. He's been briefed on everything that happened, and he'd like to speak with you personally." Is he pressing charges?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Chen, Keanu doesn't want to press charges. He wants to thank you." David was sure he'd heard wrong. "Thank me?" "Yes, can you be at Cedars-Sinai tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I'll meet you in the main lobby and take you to his room." Yes. Yes, I can be there." "Good. I'll see you then." The line went dead. David sat there staring at his phone, trying to make sense of what just happened. Keanu wanted to thank him for throwing him onto a sidewalk. He opened Twitter again. The tide had fully turned now. A statement from Keanu's publicist had just been posted. "Mr. Reeves is recovering well and would like to make it clear that the restaurant manager acted appropriately given the circumstances. He looks forward to thanking the man personally for his quick action." The comments section had exploded. "See? Keanu's a class act. Everyone who attacked that manager should apologize. This is why we love Keanu. Most humble guy in Hollywood." David closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his apartment. His hands had finally stopped shaking. The crushing weight on his chest had lifted slightly, though the guilt remained. He'd hurt someone. That much was true. But maybe, just maybe, he'd also helped them without knowing it. Tomorrow he'd find out for sure. Tomorrow he'd face Keanu Reeves and finally get some answers about what really happened that night. David looked at the clock. 4:30 in the morning. He had a meeting with his boss in 4.5 hours and another meeting with Keanu Reeves 9.5 hours after that. Sleep wasn't going to happen. But for the first time since that terrible moment on the sidewalk, David felt like maybe somehow Things might actually be okay. He just had to survive the next day first. The meeting with Richard Hawthorne went better than David expected, which wasn't saying much since he'd expected to be fired on the spot. Instead, Hawthorne had watched all the videos, read the police report, and seen the public statements from Dr. Patterson and Keanu's team. "You did what you had to do," Hawthorne had said, sitting behind his massive desk in his downtown office. "Was it perfect? No. But given what you knew at the time, you protected the staff and customers. That's what I pay you to do." David had nodded, unable to find words. "Take a few days off," Hawthorne continued. "Let this media circus die down. Then come back to work. Your job is safe, David, I want you to know that." Now standing in the lobby of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at exactly 2 p.m., David wished he felt more relieved. The job was safe, sure, but nothing about this situation felt resolved. The guilt still sat heavy in his stomach like a stone. Rebecca Walsh appeared right on time. She was younger than David expected, maybe early 30s, dressed in a sharp gray suit with her dark hair pulled into a professional bun. She walked with the kind of confidence that came from years of dealing with Hollywood's elite. "Mr. Chen?" She extended her hand. "Rebecca Walsh, thank you for coming." David shook her hand. His palm was sweaty. "I still don't really understand why I'm here." "You will." She gestured toward the elevators. "Follow me." They rode up to the 4th floor in silence. David watched the numbers climb, his heart beating faster with each floor. What was he supposed to say to Keanu? "Sorry I threw you on the ground when you were drugged? Sorry I didn't realize you needed help instead of removal?" The pediatric oncology ward was quieter than the rest of the hospital. The walls were painted in soft colors with murals of cartoon characters and superheroes. A nurse's station sat in the middle of the hallway, where 2 nurses looked up and nodded at Rebecca as they passed. She stopped at room 412 and knocked softly before opening the door. David's first thought was that Keanu looked surprisingly normal. He was sitting up in the hospital bed, dressed in regular clothes instead of a hospital gown. There was a small bandage on his cheek where the concrete had scraped him, and his lip was still slightly swollen. But otherwise he looked like any other visitor rather than a patient. A young boy sat in a chair beside the bed, holding a deck of playing cards. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, thin and pale, with a baseball cap covering what David assumed was hair loss from chemotherapy. "Tommy, this is Mr. Chen," Keanu said to the boy. His voice was calm, warm. "The man I was telling you about." Tommy looked at David with wide, curious eyes. "The restaurant guy?" "That's right," Keanu confirmed. David felt his throat tighten. This was Tommy, the kid Keanu had been trying to get back to when he was stumbling through the restaurant, confused and drugged. "Mr. Chen, please sit down," Keanu said, gesturing to another chair. Rebecca stepped outside and closed the door, giving them privacy. David sat, his hands clasped between his knees. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for what happened." Keanu held up a hand. "Stop, that's not why you're here. But I hurt you. I threw you out of my restaurant like you were some kind of threat." "I was acting like a threat," Keanu said simply. "I watched the videos. All of them. I saw myself knocking things over, stumbling around, not making sense. If I'd seen someone acting like that in public, I would have been concerned too. But you were drugged. You needed help, not to be thrown on the sidewalk." "You didn't know that," Keanu replied. His voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "You saw someone acting erratically in your place of business. You tried talking to me first. I watched that part. You tried to help. When that didn't work, you made a decision to protect everyone else in that room. That's not wrong, David. That's responsible." Tommy was watching this exchange like it was a tennis match, his head moving back and forth between them. "I still hurt you," David insisted. "You have a cut on your face. Your lip is swollen." Keanu touched the bandage on his cheek lightly. "You know what would have hurt worse? If I'd kept wandering and walked into traffic. If whoever drugged me had found me in that vulnerable state. If I'd hurt someone else while I was out of my mind." He leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Patterson told me she'd been searching for me for almost an hour. Every minute I was out there alone and confused was another minute something worse could have happened." "He's right," Tommy piped up. His voice was small but determined. "You kept him safe until the doctor found him. That's what heroes do." David looked at the kid and felt his eyes start to burn. I'm not a hero, Tommy. I made a hard choice and someone got hurt. But you made the choice trying to help people, Tommy countered. Keanu told me that's what being brave means. Doing the right thing even when it's scary, and you don't know how it'll turn out. Keanu smiled at the boy with obvious affection. See? Tommy gets it. David shook his head, still struggling to accept what they were saying. The police said someone drugged your coffee. Did they catch who did it? Keanu's expression darkened slightly. They did. A woman named Jennifer Brennan. She'd been working in hospital administration for 6 months. Turns out she had an unhealthy obsession with me, had been planning this for weeks. What was her plan? To get me alone and vulnerable. She thought if she could rescue me from whatever situation the drugs put me in, I'd be grateful. That we'd have some kind of connection. Keanu's jaw tightened. She didn't count on me leaving the hospital. She was waiting in the parking garage with her car. When I wandered off on foot, she lost track of me. David felt cold. So if you'd made it back to the parking garage, then she would have found me instead of Dr. Patterson, Keanu finished. Instead, you kept me in one place. You created a scene that made people notice. That made people call for help. In a weird way, throwing me out of your restaurant was probably the best thing that could have happened. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. See? Hero. Despite everything, David felt a small smile tug at his lips. You're pretty smart, kid. I know, Tommy said matter-of-factly, making both adults laugh. Keanu reached over and ruffled Tommy's cap gently. This guy beat me at Go Fish twice while I was drugged out of my mind. I don't think the drugs were my problem. I think he's just really good at cards. You let me win, Tommy accused. But he was grinning. Did not. Did too. David watched them joke around, and something inside him finally started to ease. This was why Keanu had been so desperate to get back, not for fame or appearances or publicity, but because he'd made a promise to a sick kid, and he took that promise seriously. Can I ask you something? David said during a pause in their banter. Of course, Keanu replied. Why did you want me to come here? You could have just released a statement saying you didn't blame me. Why go through the trouble of meeting in person? Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because I know what guilt looks like. I saw your face in one of those videos right after I fell. You looked destroyed, and I knew that no amount of public statements or lawyer speak would make you believe that you didn't do something terrible. He gestured around the hospital room. So I wanted you to see this. To see Tommy, who I was trying to get back to understand why I was so confused and desperate, to see that I'm fine, and more importantly, to hear directly from me that you did nothing wrong. You needed to know, Tommy added seriously, that you're not a bad guy. David felt his throat close up completely. He'd spent the last 36 hours convinced he'd destroyed his life and hurt an innocent person. And here was that person, along with a 10-year-old cancer patient telling him he was actually okay. Thank you, David managed to say. Both of you. You have no idea what this means. Keanu stood up and extended his hand. Actually, I think I do. David stood and shook it, and this time the handshake felt different. Not like an apology or an acceptance of guilt. It felt like understanding. Like forgiveness for something that didn't actually need forgiving. There's one more thing, Keanu said, his hand still gripping David's. But we should probably talk about that part privately. Tommy, you good if we step outside for a minute? Sure, Tommy said, already dealing out cards for another game of solitaire. I'll be here beating myself at cards. As David followed Keanu into the hallway, he wondered what else there could possibly be to discuss. He was about to find out that this strange, terrible, wonderful situation had one more surprise waiting for him. They walked down the hallway to a small waiting area near the windows. The afternoon sun was streaming in, making everything feel warmer than the sterile hospital atmosphere usually allowed. Keanu gestured to a couple of chairs and they both sat down. I've been thinking about something, Keanu started, his voice low enough that they wouldn't be overheard, about what happened and about why it happened. David waited, not sure where this was going. That woman who drugged me, Jennifer, she got close because no one was paying attention. No one was watching for threats. And that's on me, partially. I don't usually travel with security when I'm doing things like hospital visits. It feels wrong to show up to see sick kids with bodyguards in tow, you know? I can understand that, David said. But this situation showed me I need to be smarter. Not just for me, but for the people around me. For kids like Tommy who don't need their special day ruined by some stalker's obsession. Keanu turned to look directly at David. You made a split-second decision under pressure. You assessed a threat and you acted. That's a valuable skill. David felt his pulse quicken. What are you saying? I'm saying I need someone who thinks like you do. Someone who can spot problems before they become disasters. Someone who isn't afraid to make hard calls. Keanu paused. I'd like to offer you a job heading security for my production company. David's mouth fell open. What? No, I mean thank you, but no. I'm not a security professional. I'm a restaurant manager. You're someone who stays calm in crisis situations and makes logical decisions to protect people, Keanu corrected. That's exactly what I need. The technical security stuff can be taught. The instincts you showed? Those can't be. David shook his head. I appreciate this, I really do. But I can't accept. I've spent 12 years building a career in hospitality. That's what I know. That's what I'm good at. Fair enough, Keanu said, and he didn't look offended. Just thoughtful. Can I ask you something then? What's your dream? If you could do anything in the restaurant world, what would it be? The question caught David off guard. He'd had dreams once, big ones, but they'd gotten buried under the day-to-day reality of managing someone else's business. I'd want my own place, David admitted. Something smaller than Hawthorne's restaurant. More personal. A place where people feel like family. Where we could actually know our regular customers' names and their stories. Good food, reasonable prices, a place that gives back to the community. He laughed, a bit embarrassed. I've actually got notebooks full of ideas. Menu concepts, design sketches, even a name picked out. What's the name? Second Chances, David said quietly. Because everyone deserves one and because good food has a way of making bad days better. It's cheesy, I know. Keanu smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes. It's not cheesy. It's perfect. Especially given what we just went through. He stood up and pulled out his phone. What if I invested in that dream instead? David blinked. I'm sorry, what? You don't want to work in security, and honestly, after thinking about it, you're probably right. Your passion is hospitality, not protection. But what happened between us proves something important. It proves that good intentions and split-second decisions can lead to unexpected outcomes. Sometimes those outcomes are negative, but sometimes they're positive in ways we never imagined. Keanu typed something on his phone, then showed David the screen. It was a bank app, showing an amount that made David's vision blur. That's what I was going to offer as a starting salary for the security position. But I'd rather invest it in something you actually care about. Help you open Second Chances. I'd be a silent partner, just providing the capital. You'd run everything. Make all the decisions. Build the place you've been dreaming about. David couldn't speak. He literally couldn't form words. The amount on that screen was more than he'd make in 3 years at the restaurant. Why would you do this? He finally managed. Keanu put his phone away. A few reasons. One, because the media circus around this incident is going to follow both of us for a while. People will be curious about you, about your restaurant, about what happens next. If you open a new place, you'll have built-in publicity. Might as well use it for something positive. Okay, David said slowly. What are the other reasons? 2, because I believe in supporting small businesses, especially ones with heart. And 3, because what happened between us shouldn't end with just forgiveness and moving on. It should end with something better than where we started. That's how you turn a bad situation into a good story. David leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything. This is insane. Probably, Keanu agreed. But I've found that the best decisions in life usually feel a little insane at first. I'd need to think about it, plan it out properly, find the right location, hire staff. There's so much that goes into opening a restaurant. Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Keanu pulled out a business card and handed it to David. That's Rebecca's direct number. When you're ready to move forward, call her and she'll set everything up. No strings attached, no creative control from me. Your vision, your restaurant. David held the card like it might disappear if he gripped it too tight. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. That's enough for now. They walked back to Tommy's room together. The boy had fallen asleep in his chair, the deck of cards scattered on his lap. He looked so small and fragile but peaceful. He's been having a rough week, Keanu said softly. The treatment makes him tired, but he fought to stay awake as long as he could. Wanted to meet the guy from the restaurant story. He's a good kid, David said. The best. Keanu adjusted the blanket that had slipped from Tommy's shoulders. His family can't afford much. Medical bills are crushing them. Whatever happens with the restaurant, I'm going to make sure they're taken care of. It's the least I can do. David watched Keanu fuss over the sleeping child, making sure he was comfortable, and he understood something important. This wasn't just a celebrity doing charity work for good publicity. This was someone who genuinely cared, who showed up and kept his promises even when drugged coffee and stalkers got in the way. "I'll think about your offer," David said. "Seriously, think about it. That's all I ask." They shook hands again at the door. This time it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. "One more thing," Keanu said as David was about to leave. "When you do open second chances, and I say when not if because I have a feeling about this, make sure you save a table for me and Tommy. We've got a rematch of Go Fish to finish, and we're going to need some good food to go with it." David felt his eyes sting for the second time that day. "You'll have a permanent table, reserved whenever you want it. Deal." David left the hospital in a daze. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, just staring at Rebecca Walsh's business card. His phone buzzed with a text from Kelly asking how the meeting went. He didn't know how to answer that. How do you explain that the worst night of your life somehow turned into one of the most hopeful? 3 months later, David stood in front of a small storefront in a nice neighborhood about 2 miles from where the incident happened. The sign above the door read "Second Chances" in warm, welcoming letters. The interior was exactly what he'd imagined. Cozy, comfortable, with a community board on one wall where local organizations could post about events and needs. The kitchen was state-of-the-art but efficient. The menu featured comfort food made with quality ingredients at prices that wouldn't break anyone's budget. And in the back corner there was a table that always had a small reserved sign on it. Kelly had left Hawthorne's to become his assistant manager. Tom, the young waiter who'd almost been knocked over that night, signed on as head server. Even Mr. Hawthorne had stopped by to wish them well. No hard feelings about David moving on. Opening night was packed. Some people came because of curiosity about the story. Some came because they'd seen the positive press. Some came because they'd heard the food was excellent and the prices were fair. And some came because they needed a second chance at something, even if it was just a good meal and a friendly smile. Keanu and Tommy showed up an hour into service, quietly slipping into their reserved table. Tommy's color was better, his treatment was working, and he was beating Keanu at cards again while they waited for their food. David brought their meals out personally. Meatloaf for Tommy, grilled salmon for Keanu, both dishes made exactly the way they'd requested. "So," Keanu said, looking around the restaurant with approval, "was it worth it?" David thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the guilt, the shame, the unexpected forgiveness, and the even more unexpected opportunity that came from it all. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "It really was." Tommy held up his glass of lemonade. "To second chances." David and Keanu raised their glasses too. "To second chances," they echoed. And in that moment, surrounded by the sound of happy customers and the smell of good food and the warmth of new friendship, David understood something important. Sometimes the worst moments in life aren't endings at all. Sometimes they're just the beginning of something better than you ever imagined possible. You just have to be brave enough to see it through.